Years ago. 15 years ago, we didn't have people coming around. I mean, the whole thing. And in all fairness, we went after Iraq. They did not knock down the World Trade Center, okay? It wasn't the Iraqis that knocked down the World Trade Center. We went after Iraq. We decimated the country. Iran's taken over, okay. But it wasn't the Iraqis. You will find out who really knocked down the World Trade Center because they have papers in there that are very secret. You may find it's the Saudis, okay? But you will find out. But it wasn't Iraq. So you say, but when I look at a guy like Lindsey Graham, then I hear...
And we are live.
Welcome back, beautiful and amazing human beings. This is Rudkowski of WeAreChange.org. And of course, today is a very somber day, a day of remembrance, loss, and of course, significant changes in all of our lives that still affect us 17 years later on. And of course, I'm talking about 9/11. And that's why in this video, in this live broadcast, me and Jason Bermas want to talk about some of the untold stories of this event and the preceding events of people seeking justice from it. If you guys don't know Jason Bermas is a part of many documentary films out there, one of which is, of course, WeAreChange, which Jason was pretty much one of the first viral mega blockbuster hits of the internet. Before YouTube and Google started implementing their algorithms, recommending what videos people should and shouldn't see, shadow banning, demonetizing, and censoring other videos, they had a platform where the number one video that got the number one views, got the number one hits, was shown. And because of that, WeAreChange, a documentary which raised very important questions about 9/11, was one of the first major internet videos out there that had a huge effect on the big national political discourse. And Jason, you were a big part of that. I was a small part of that. Yeah, we are here now 17 years later on.
Yeah, and unfortunately, on a day like today, it almost feels like we failed, Luke. And I hate to say it like that, and it's hard. And, you know, obviously today is not a day of celebration by any means, but we were able to get into the mainstream consciousness. We were able to penetrate a lot of different viewpoints, Luke, and I think that that's what the strongest thing about the situation is that people do question more. A lot of people don't trust the official narrative, not only of 9/11, but obviously of what's happening in Syria. They're not buying into the fact that we need to be in Iraq anymore, or even Afghanistan, our longest standing war to date. So, you know, it was a different time. I remember when WeAreChange topped Google Video in the top 10 to 15 spots in several different languages just because people were translating it for us and re-uploading it. So how times have changed. Google literally took over YouTube, basically getting rid of that platform, and they've regulated these new platforms so much that it's hard for us to even have a voice with 500,000 followers.
Well, yeah, very heavily regulated because of the effect that we had before. And it is a very somber day. I mean, I was in New York City when 9/11 happened. I was in school here in Brooklyn. And again, it was a very, 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 very difficult, scary, terrifying day. You know, a lot of the younger people don't really understand the huge significance of it. But back then, the internet wasn't as prevalent as it was. You could mainly get texts and pictures mainly on the internet, not as much as videos, especially in 2001. And I remember being in a classroom, hearing that this happened, seeing a huge, cloud of smoke and dust pretty much cover my entire neighborhood. A lot of people need to remember, especially about that day. This is why this broadcast is very significant, because the ramifications of that event not only affect us geopolitically, especially with American domestic and foreign policy, but also with the people who still live here. I remember just constant just fear, paranoia, and panic. There's a number of, friends that I had who had parents inside of the Twin Towers, seeing them break down, seeing the news, seeing the old school VCR kind of TV being wheeled in, and they were showing us the news of that day. Our parents were picking us up, and I remember just walking back, and you could write your name like it was snow all over my neighborhood in New York City. And the papers from the World Trade Center were all over my neighborhood as well. A lot of that big dust plume and smoke directly ran south east into Brooklyn, into the neighborhoods that I lived in. And I remember there was always fears of other planes being in the air. There was a lot of fake news out there. But one of the things that was very significant was the government always telling us afterwards that, yeah, guys, the air is safe to breathe. Don't worry, the air is fine. Everything's okay. Go back to normal. Even though when you got back home, it was just constant nonstop programming of the Twin Towers coming down, Osama bin Laden. There's a lot of fake news out there of supposedly Palestinians celebrating, which later we found out wasn't true. But I totally bought and sold into the complete narrative that they were pushing. And I was like, yeah, the government wouldn't lie about the air. You know, there was also afterwards when we came back to school, there was constant bomb threats made to our school. There's constant evacuations that I had to deal with. And it was really just a very gray, dark period when I remember it. When I look back into 9/11, I was still, a teenager at that time, but I just remember just even the weather afterwards, even the aftermath afterwards. It was so gray and gloomy, and every television program, everywhere you looked, it was always the same thing: horrific images of thousands of people dying, and then constant propaganda and fear mongering. And I was utterly terrified. I was ready to sign up for the military right then and there. And one of the most significant things that is still affecting us is, of course, the air quality. Not many people know this, but the Twin Towers, a large portion of them were filled with asbestos. They were called big white elephants. They were called, there's even news publications before 9/11 talking about how doing a renovation would cost more than a demolition of the Twin Towers because of the levels of asbestos inside of those big, huge buildings. And when they came down, obviously, it spread that asbestos all over and has affected tens of thousands of New Yorkers, especially all the rescue workers who were working on there, which brings me to the first story that I wanted to talk about. This one is by the LA Times that says September 11th is still killing FBI agents. 15 agents dead from 9/11 linked cancers. Article cites 7,500 total first responder cancer cases and counting. And dealing with the aftermath of 9/11, I got to know a lot of these first responders. I went to a lot of funerals as well because of their subsequent death that happened because of cancer and other illness-related sicknesses from the air quality down there, which the government, again, through the media, was always saying the air was safe to breathe. No one in the mainstream media has ever put the two together, that the buildings had asbestos in them, and it takes one nanoparticle of asbestos to create asbestosis, which leads to lung cancer. No one has even dared to question the government's narrative, and it came out later, Jason, that the EPA did their initial studies down at ground zero after 9/11, and they said, yeah, this air is toxic. It's unbreathable. It's going to cause a lot of human suffering. That EPA document was sent to the White House. It was then edited, largely in part because of the help of Condoleezza Rice and other George W. Bush officials who knowingly lied and said, no, the air is safe to breathe. One of the biggest lies that, of course, will kill more people than have actually died on 9/11. And the numbers are still unknown because it's impossible to track all of these illnesses that are happening because of 9/11, because of the dust plume. And it may even affect me severely in my life with me being outside and walking around and being a part of some of the remembrance ceremonies. I remember we always used to light candles and go outside and have little vigils here all over New York City, especially being in this community that was affected. It's something that needs to be understood because, again, guys, like, regardless of all the theories out there and everything else, the fact that the government lied and killed more people after 9/11 because of this egregious bullcrap that they knowingly forged, is an outright atrocity, and it is still killing human beings. That's why when I saw Mayor Bloomberg tweet, quote, "We will never forget," with a picture of the new World Trade Center tower, I had to tweet right back at him. I'm like, yeah, let's not forget how you, as the mayor of New York City, continually blocked efforts to provide basic medical benefits to the thousands of 9/11 first responders, which you screwed over and ignored for years. There was a huge battle that people need to know, that people don't really understand, that happened between myself and then former mayor Michael Bloomberg, because Bloomberg was even denying basic medical benefits that were entitled to first responders, to police officers, to firefighters, to medics who were down there, who had it in their city contract. Like, if I get sick on the job, you will take care of me. Bloomberg was even denying those benefits. And of course, this prompted me to confront Mayor Bloomberg a number of times, screaming at him at many press conferences, with him always refusing to answer the question, why is he denying basic medical benefits that were entitled to city workers and screwing them over? It came to a point where almost every ribbon cutting, every radio interview, every public event, every ceremony, every award he got, me and all the other WeAreChange members that were there were always up front in his face being like, why are you allowing sick and dying 9/11 first responders to die on your watch, denying them basic health benefits? It came to a point, and not many people know this story, Jason. I want to share this story before we get into anything else, because this is a very, very, very important story. Mayor Bloomberg was running for re-election for a third term, which was unprecedented. This was against a lot of the legal statutes that were established in our country, and especially in the state and city of New York. And he wanted a third term, which was going to be very contentious because, again, he's going 3 times instead of 2, which was the legal limit. At that point, Mayor Bloomberg was getting harassed by WeAreChange to the point where he reached out to the #1 organization, nonprofit organization that we were working with, that we were collaborating with, raising funds for 9/11 first responders. Since the city didn't do it, we decided to do it. Reached out to them, and he said, look, if Luke and WeAreChange leave me alone, I promise I will help you pass the James Sadroga bill. I promise I will help you and your first responders get the benefits that they're entitled to, and to get the proper medical coverage that they deserve. Of course, this nonprofit called me right away. I told them, Mayor Bloomberg is a scumbag. Don't believe him, but I respect your wishes. Your battle is literally a battle of life and death to get even proper medication, because a lot of the first responders were going bankrupt and couldn't afford all the medication that they had to buy. And I said, look, it's a battle of life and death. I'm going to respect your decision here. I don't agree with it, but I will respect it. And there was other events where I saw Bloomberg, walked right past him. We always stared at each other awkwardly. He knew exactly who I was. I knew exactly who he was. And very tense moments where I just had to take a deep breath, let go of what Mayor Michael Bloomberg, the billionaire who meets with Oprah Winfrey and the Rockefellers and other globalists and have secret meetings about. That's a whole nother story even to get into. A couple months passed, he wins re-election, and one of the first thing he does, and he cuts medical benefits for thousands of first responders, going back on his promise, lying. That nonprofit organization head called me up. He said, Luke, Mayor Bloomberg just screwed us over and he lied to us and he just won re-election. Go get him. I remember going out to one of the big galas that he was doing where he was being celebrated. I remember going up the escalators, and as soon as I was going up the escalators, literally they had the suits, NYPD intelligence. They had this one specific guy with just a short crew cut who was almost balding. And as soon as I'm going up the escalator, they're waiting for me there, and they're like, Rudkowski, I got my camera in hand. I'm like, yeah, what can I help you with? This is a public event. I'm here as press. What's the problem? Like, come with me downstairs. I'm like, yeah, whatever. Go downstairs. I'm like, let me go outside for a smoke. They're like, no. I'm like, wait. So you're saying I'm detained? They're like, yeah, you're detained. You stay right here in the lobby of this hotel. As I'm standing there for about 10 minutes, I recorded the whole thing, filmed the whole thing. That same NYPD intelligence officer, which was designated to Mayor Bloomberg and was Mayor Bloomberg's personal protection, runs up with 15 police officers, all running up to me, smiling, laughing, takes my hands, put it behind my back, handcuffs me and says, Luke, you were trespassing. this is criminal trespassing. We asked you to leave. I'm like, no, you didn't. I have you on video saying you're detained and that I have to stay here. Took away the video camera as soon as I said that, and then put me to jail through central bookings for 3 days. Literally criminal trespassing. When you're at a precinct, you get a little ticket, you show up to court later. No, I was at the precinct that they arrested me in. NYPD intelligence came up. The officer that was processing me recognized me, was also a fan of WeAreChange. People need to understand this. A lot of people ridiculed us and said we were and attacked us with so many ad hominem attacks, but don't understand the bigger story here that we want to share here is that a lot of the rescue workers, a lot of the family members, a lot of the people who survived 9/11 were with us with calling for justice, not only for 9/11 first responders, but also the family members. So I had a friendly police officer, and he told me NYPD intelligence came down. I saw all the suits come down. They messed up my paperwork and made sure that they sent me down to central bookings for 3 days where I had to eat. They gave me like one glass of water, and they gave me these like a cheese sandwich for 3 days with the most atrocious, horrible kind of behavior that they could actually throw at me. He was giving me tips and pointers, but that's the way that local government works. That's the way that's what people need to remember when they're thinking about Mayor Bloomberg trying to get brownie points right now, tweeting, quote, "We will never forget." People need to understand the true history of this. Because it's more important than ever with the dereliction of duty and the bastardized government that came afterwards that screwed people over. And to me, this is a very important story to share, and a story that is still continuing, that is still affecting people, that may affect me, but has already affected thousands and will affect thousands more, mainly because the government lied on 9/11, ultimately killing more people from that event than that actual event. That's what I wanted to point out. Jason, what are your thoughts and comments on that?
Well, I mean, there's a lot to unpack there, Luke. Going back to, I guess, the way everybody felt that day and in the weeks and months afterwards, it was almost like a paralysis. I think that people don't get the fact that not only, like you were talking about bomb threats at your school, right? That was actually extremely prevalent throughout the country and especially in the state, especially after the anthrax attacks, which shortly followed 9/11, which of course they intertwined as like a follow-up terrorist attack. We were literally on edge for days, weeks, and months waiting for something else to happen. I remember, I'm in upstate New York in Oneonta, and all of a sudden I'm seeing all these special teams out by, a small river that we have here, and they're checking it because they suspect there's a possibility that there's something wrong or someone put anthrax in the water. This was very real to so many of us. And not only...
Yeah, I remember people not wanting to check their mail or refusing to check their mail because there was all this propaganda in the news saying your mail may be linked to anthrax because of all the anthrax being sent around everywhere. And of course, the whole anthrax story, that has a whole bunch of holes in it as well, where the anthrax came from, how it was engineered, and who it was used against was also extremely telling, and it had a lot of holes in it when it came to the official story. Sorry, continue on, Jason.
No, you're absolutely correct. And one of the big things that we have to talk about there is the fact that it seems like they targeted members of the media and government. It was sent to the head of the National Enquirer. It was sent to Tom Daschle, the senator at the time. And it really
Which I talked to Daschle about, which I actually confronted Senator Daschle about, and talked to him one-on-one about that. And he was like, oh, my God. Like he looked like he saw a ghost when I was like, okay, let's talk about the contradictions here from the official story and what happened to you and why aren't you raising hell about this? And he pretty much conceded to a lot of those facts.
Well, he kind of had to because, they tried to pin it on several people, but every time they tested it, they realized that this was military grade and more than likely came from a U.S. military installation, which, of course, goes way against the official version. If you look at what was written in those letters, it was death to America, death to Israel, very pro-Islamic. This is, for a lot of people, and I know it's hard for this generation to understand, this was our introduction to large-scale Muslim terror. It had been somewhat introduced in 1993 with that bombing, but we're talking about 8 years later. And, you know, as I've discussed before, Luke, all major media operations were taken over by the news. VH1 was the news, MTV was the news, Nickelodeon was the news. We literally had 24/7 news coverage on every single network for almost
it was
a
ridiculous.
week.
Yeah, MTV was like, okay, guys, let's call Ja Rule. Let's find out what Ja Rule thinks about 9/11. And then, like, right in the days, and it was all concentrated just on that. It was just utterly insane. Every single news channel, VH1, Comedy Central, MTV, every one of them just ran nonstop coverage of this for days and weeks to come afterwards, where they just ingrained it in us. Because yet again, the internet wasn't as prevalent, wasn't as popular, wasn't as relevant back in 2001.
And it certainly wasn't able to host video content in the manner it is today. And it wasn't possible for someone like me to shoot a video, take that video, and then upload it immediately. Right now, I mean, you look at 17 years later, and we're streaming this in high definition, something that didn't even exist in 2001, okay? The first HD televisions were just starting to come around. They were still CRTVs. There weren't a lot of flat screens out there. In order to make a video and put it on the internet, you had to compress it highly for a real video player. Remember, this is pre-YouTube. This is the Windows Media Player days, and it was just so difficult to find any relevant information about 9/11 that was outside the scope of what the mainstream was pushing. And just like you, Luke, as these events happened, I bought them hook, line, and sinker. I thought that excuse my language, that Muhammad Atta was the most evil man in the world, and Bin Laden was the devil, and we really need to go get these guys. And just like you, it was like, should I go sign up for the military? Because in 1999, I had actually taken the military ASVAB test to possibly go into the National Guard with my good friend that I was in college and I grew up with. And luckily, and very luckily, you know, my stepfather was a former Marine. And when the recruiters started calling my house, he cursed them out and said, you know, my kid's not going. And my friend who signed up for the National Guard, yeah, he ended up doing a couple tours in Iraq. Yeah, blew out his eardrum.
They had total control of the narrative, and they literally made me go to the recruiting station and try to sign up as well. And they were like, "No, you're too young, son." I'm like, "I don't care. I want to go. I want to go fight in Afghanistan." That's how much control and emotional manipulation they had over everyone. Freaking going into Afghanistan. Why? Like, why did the Afghanistan war even start? It's still continuing on today. And then luckily being able to hear, because I was involved in different movements, 9/11 definitely re-engaged me to be very involved in what was happening in this world. And through my discourse of learning, I actually ran into a former Iraq vet from the first Gulf War all the way back in the early 1990s. And he came back destroyed from DU, depleted uranium, that the United States was using, which was radioactive and killing soldiers that were fighting alongside the United States. And actually hearing from the soldier, seeing him and how his life was in shambles and how the military was not helping him after he was dying from their depleted uranium munitions, that was the only thing that stopped me from actually going into the U.S. military. And that slowly and then, of course, waking up to the first responders, waking up to how the government lied about the air. All this stuff started waking me up to the bigger picture here. Sorry, continue on, Jason. Finish off.
No, you know, let's go to that point really quickly. You know, you're talking about depleted uranium and you're talking about the first Gulf War. Well, a lot of people don't understand that a lot of soldiers did come back with what is called Gulf War syndrome, where, you know, they physically weren't able to do things. And a lot of this was due to the depleted uranium exposure. And once again, without a large-scale internet. Remember, it was like 1994 that we even started to see AOL Instant Messenger and dial-up. There really was not a lot of information. And of course, when the media covered it, they were skeptical and they would take the side of the government and they would say that these claims were unproven and that's why they weren't getting these benefits. And of course, this leaks its way into 9/11 and even today when you had to have, I mean, Luke, When we say that you went after Michael Bloomberg, there's a 3-part series of you confronting him on the subway, and that's far from the only time that you went after him. And as you stated, he never gave the support to the first responders that they were supposed to get, and many, many people have passed on, and we're talking about not passed on last year. We're talking about passed on almost a decade ago is really when they started dropping like flies. And I hate to put it that way, but I met so many people on the 5th anniversary of 9/11, on the 6th anniversary of 9/11, that just weren't there later on. They didn't make it. And unfortunately, and then this speaks to society and our celebritard culture and how we are just so obsessed with fame and fortune that it took somebody like Jon Stewart to even bring that issue to the forefront. And in my mind, much too late. Don't get me wrong. I commend Stewart for what he has done for the Zadroga Act and bringing awareness on forums such as Bill Maher's Real Time in places that we would never be able to go. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah. But I remember going down to Washington, D.C., busloads of 9/11 first responders who were sick, who were in wheelchairs, who were coughing up blood. There's been so many times. I've been to way too many funerals because of these frickin' government lies, and now they're purporting to be the heroes of this thing. No. They are absolute liars with blood on their frickin' hands. I was there where like literally first responders were bawling their eyes out, crying, being like, why are you screwing me over? Why did you first cause something that makes me die? And now even making sure that I can't even pay for my medical treatments. It was just utterly insane, and it pisses me off to my core because, again, with the control of the narrative, they started losing it when Loose Change started coming out, when YouTube coming out, when the algorithms weren't rigged against us, and we were able to get the messages and the voices of these first responders, but also family members out there. And one of the most impressive videos, I think I'm going to share this, unless you have something else to say, Jason. But just really quick, I just really want people to understand here. This was not a movement of people sitting in their basements making stuff up about hypothetical holograms and space beams and space weapons, which the mainstream media purported it to be. They lost a lot of that control because of people who actually started coming out that, of course, they refused to mention. They had all the crazies on all the top talk show hosts. They slandered us. We were in, like you a part of Loose Change and me a part of WeAreChange and New York 9/11 Truth. We were pretty much in every single news publication, and they tried to tar and feather us when we were standing there with first responders, with rescue workers, with survivors, and the family members of 9/11 demanding justice from a lying, manipulating government that was only out there for themselves, that was really conducting a war on the people instead of a war on terror. It was a terror on the American civilization that still continues today, and it has come full circle, which we're going to talk about in just a few minutes, with how the United States is still on the side of Al-Qaeda, not just when Zbigniew Brzezinski did that in 1979 with the Mujahideen, the supposed freedom fighters, literally giving U.S. tax dollars for radical Islamic terrorists to fight the Russians, which, again, I confronted Zbigniew Brzezinski on that, too. I called them out. I was like, you supported and sponsored Al-Qaeda. You're the one who brought rise to them. You're the one who was talking about, it doesn't really matter if we funded them and made them as popular as they are in Afghanistan right now. Even after 9/11, he was saying that. So it's just a bunch of ridiculous bullcrap. Jason, I'm gonna leave you the last comment, and I want you to introduce this new video of Bob McLevane, who, again, is someone that we have worked very closely with. He's in Loose Change. He's been at many events that I've been doing. He lost his son on 9/11 under very precarious situations that need to be questioned, because how his son died questions the official narrative, and he was a family member seeking justice who was standing there with us that, of course, the mainstream media chose to ignore. They talked about all the crazy Looney Tunes, crazy conspiracy theorists to try to discredit this movement, but when it came to us standing with Bob McLevane, standing with John Schroeder, standing with William Rodriguez, again, all heroes of that day, No. They never talked about that. And that's when I started seeing how manipulative, how controlled the mainstream media is, and how cancerous they are to our human society. Jason, go on.
Yeah, and that's the truth. You look at a guy like Bob McLevane here, and he struggled so hard to even get his voice heard. He did numerous commercials. There was actually a movement to get billboards questioning Building 7, and he did one of these small PSA types ads talking about this. But this is a man who lost his son and just wants the truth. Now, this is a 7-minute video. I don't know if we're going to play the whole thing, but we're definitely going to play some portions of it. And as we go, we may stop and talk about some of the relevant questions that he's bringing up. But he's far from the only family member that stood with us on the 5th anniversary of 9/11. And even by that time, the mainstream media was in full cover up and smear mode because they didn't want to show thousands of peaceful activists questioning the official event of, or the official version of 9/11. So without further ado, here is Bob McIlvaine.
My son Bobby was killed in the World Trade Center by an explosion that went off before the towers fell. Bobby was entering the lobby on his way to a meeting. The explosion that killed him may have happened right when the first plane hit. But according to some eyewitnesses, it occurred even before that.
I think a bomb went off in the lobby first, then a plane hit the building.
The bomb hit the lobby first, and a couple of seconds then the first plane hit.
We were on the field, I had a full body, and we took him home and buried him. Bobby's whole face was obliterated, and then had lacerations through his chest. It just seemed like he was hit. The only way I can say is it looked like he was hit by a shotgun. With his injuries, there was no doubt in my mind that he was hit with some sort of explosion. I talked to, I don't know how many firemen.
Try to boost the volume, Jason.
Yeah, I know. I can't get it any louder.
People in the basement. And everyone's talking about these explosions going off.
We was in the explosion. We was in the lobby, and the third explosion, the whole lobby collapsed on us.
I spoke to the chief of safety for the New York City Fire Department. He thinks that there were actually devices that were planted in the building.
There was a secondary explosion, probably a device either planted before or on the aircraft.
What you told me is that there was a plane or whatever hit the building.
All right, I'm going to pause it there. Now, a lot of these clips are actually in the Loose Change final cut, and I apologize about the volume, guys. I only have so much control, especially when I have a guest on through Skype like Luke. But what you're looking at are first responders, witnesses, talking about explosions that happened aside from when the plane hit. And McIlvaine talking about his son possibly in one of these secondary explosions. And of course...
Well, Bob's very important to point out here because he simply wasn't one of these, conspiracy theorists. He was like, wait, my son died in a lobby from secondary explosions, which the government says never happened. Can we get some answers here? He was a part of the 9/11 Commission. He was a part of a larger network of family members. And if you remember, they tried to assign Henry Kissinger, Henry mass-murdering, blood on his hands, the worst and shadiest politician in American history. They tried to appoint him to be head of the 9/11 Commission, which, of course, the family members had to protest, and we were calling out from day one because, again, the shadowy connections that Henry Kissinger has to a lot of secret societies, to a lot of the interconnected deep state, whatever you call it, intelligence agencies, is extremely sinister, especially with his ties to Saudi Arabia. The family members were like, well, yeah, we'll let you be a part of the 9/11 Commission as long as you release your ties to Saudi Arabia. Henry Kissinger then quietly bowed out and was like, no, I don't want to be 9/11 Commissioner anymore. I'm not going to disclose my connections and ties to Saudi Arabia at all. So Bob came from the point of view like, hey, let's get some questions here. And when the government started stonewalling him, trying to shut him up, they did the same thing with William Rodriguez, who, by the way, rescued hundreds of people's lives on 9/11. William Rodriguez, we did a number of interviews with them. Again, we're going to be posting all of our interviews with a lot of these heroes, Bob McIlvaine, John Schroeder, William Rodriguez. There's a number of interviews that I have conducted with them, and about countless dozens number of eyewitnesses and survivors and rescue workers that their official story contradicts. Kevin McPadden, Craig Bartmer, contradicts everything that the government told us on that day. So when you have people who survived 9/11, who lived through it, who saw things that the government said never happened, and they all collude in the same story, someone here is not telling the truth. And that, of course, was the government. They were covering it up, and covering up in so many sinister ways. And then we're here standing with them in the streets, especially on the 5th anniversary. On the 5th anniversary of 9/11, we had thousands of people in New York City. Jason, what was it? 10,000 T-shirts that we gave out? Black T-shirts that said investigate 9/11. 100,000 DVDs. in one day. We gave out millions of DVDs of your movie, Jason, and other movies out there. Like almost close to 1 million DVDs that we personally handed out to people at Ground Zero. I was there every single Saturday. And I had countless numbers of people who were affected by 9/11 coming to me being like, yeah, the government's lying. The government's not telling the truth about this story. And then, of course, we were slandered everywhere. And with thousands of people, 10,000 black T-shirts given out saying investigate 9/11. I remember calling that day and making sure that we do this protest. Even back in the day, Immortal Technique was out there. Alex Jones was even freaking out there before he became a Trumpster. All these other people were out there. We had so many different also celebrities and politicians come down. But mainly, I remember calling this event and I'm like, look, during the memorial, we're going to be quiet, we're going to be respectful, we're going to pay our respects. After the memorial, we're going to have marches and demonstrations that are orderly. We had a great connection with the police department. Usually the police department is very aggressive against protesters, but they treated us with just outright respect. We had thousands of people, unpermitted protests, and we were like, okay, we got our own security guards. We don't need you guys, but you guys are obviously here, so let's cooperate and work together. And they were like, yeah, we stand with you guys. We stand with you guys being here. We want to help you guys because our guys are dying. The government's lying about this, and we're here supporting with you. Even NYPD officers in uniforms, firefighters in uniforms came up to us. Family members came up to us, stood behind us. We had, moments of silence. We had walks and processions. And that was the year that the mainstream media refused to get a shot of everyone at Ground Zero. They always did the above shots. And what you saw is just people wearing with black T-shirts surrounding Ground Zero, calling for justice, calling for answers from all the government's lies. And of course, they never dared mention or talked about the huge presence that we actually had there on that eater. You were there too, Jason.
Yeah, and that day started off for me anyway, and the other guys from WeAreChange at Democracy Now! With Amy Goodman versus Popular Mechanics, where a lot of people have pointed to that debate. Some people think that I did an amazing job. Other people, of course, attacked me for my job on that. But the fact remains, I was supposed to be on Glenn Beck when he was still on CNN that very day against Popular Mechanics afterwards, and they canceled it. I was in talks with them all week, and we were ready to go, and they canceled it. They didn't want to talk to me and have me challenge the Popular Mechanics guys like I did earlier that day. So Glenn Beck was one of the few people to show protesters down at Ground Zero, but he did so at a front angle away from it so that he could claim there were only hundreds of us. Again, we gave away thousands of T-shirts and thousands of DVDs that day alone. And when you talk about the police presence there, we were arm in arm with a lot of off-duty officers. Forget about ones that were directly affected by 9/11. I remember riding in, people would see our shirts in fire trucks, they would beep at us, they would smile, they would say, thank you so much for doing this, we need the truth out about this. And that was one of the biggest moments in my life to this day. I remember being with Immortal Technique on stage and having so many people get so aggressive and want the truth. And it feels good when you're doing a good thing like that. But again, Luke, now we're here 17 years later. All of these wars of aggression are still going on. And it feels like, politicians that dare to address this are doing so in a manner to only placate to the people, just like Donald Trump said in the intro to this video when he said we're going to find out who did 9/11 and then drop the subject completely after being elected. Unfortunately, this is the attitude of most people in politics, and that's why we've never been about right or left. We're about right and wrong, Luke.
Well, that's a huge important aspect that people need to understand here. We were raising money for first responders. We were doing the job that the government failed to do. And that's why we had huge mass support. But in the media, they smeared us as crazy conspiracy theorists, nutbags, jihad lovers. And I'm like, what the hell's going on here? What kind of world are we living in when we're trying to do the right thing? The government is lying, killing people, censoring them, and then we're getting trashed on the mainstream media. And then they refused. The majority of the mainstream media refused to talk about the survivors and what they saw and how it contradicted the official story. Refused to even sometimes talk about the 9/11 first responders. I remember trying to push this issue on the media, and our YouTube channel being the pivotal kind of channel. This is why we're prominent as we are, because we documented it. We talked to first responders that were sick and dying that the media at first refused to talk about. Then they started covering it, and then they started actually talking about this. But there's so many issues. There's such propaganda out there. It really just woke me up because they never tried to have any of the legitimate reasons and concerns and questions on. They had people come in that would just push these outrageous, like crazy ideas out there. And they're like, I figured out what exactly happened on 9/11, and it was intergalactic beings, and it was holographic planes, and it was space beams. And I'm like, wait, dude, you don't even have to go that way. But that was the whole face of the movement because they pushed it towards the front. That was the kind of information warfare that was happening, and it was very severe and it was very serious. There was so much slander out there. I mean, the SPLC attacked us. The SPLC attacked me personally, called us right-wing hate group. We weren't even right-wing then. We weren't even
then. I've never been right-wing. Never.
Yeah, at the same time, Fox News, Bill O'Reilly, were calling us jihad-loving liberals on Fox News. And I'm like, wait, Bill O'Reilly's calling me a jihad-loving liberal. I'm being labeled by the SPLC as a hate group. They listed more WeAreChange organizations that I even knew existed. And I'm like, how do they know about all these WeAreChange chapters that we have? And I was like, thanks for helping me organize this. Because it was just based on a basic idea and premise of being the change that you want to see in this world. We did this from we tried to do this from a horizontal power structure where there's no one person telling other people what to do. And again, we're seeing never forget trend. Let's never forget the truth about that day. Let's never forget the mass media disinformation, propaganda, information warfare that happened on that day and how they still try to push it on today on everyone with anyone just asking legitimate questions about it. And that's why we're doing this broadcast. That's why it's very important. And that's why you guys being a part of this audience, sharing this broadcast and helping us be here means the world to us. But let's just move forward because there's still a lot of things I want to talk about here.
Well, you know what, Luke, let me stop you really quick because I think it's really important for people to understand, for instance, that the term truther did not exist when we started doing this, okay? And you were talking about how they tried to associate us with no planes, with space beams, with aliens. And I specifically remember going to a lot of these events and people trying to get me to talk about plane sharks and interdimensional beings and all sorts of bullshiz that would completely discredit what I was saying. And originally, the media, again, tried to associate us with Holocaust denial and called us 9/11 deniers. And then they decided, let's just embrace the 9/11 truth movement and try to smear these people by calling them truthers. And that was about, 2006, right around the 5th anniversary, that the term truther became some kind of a negative connotation. How insane is that? That people bought into the media manipulation, the government manipulation, that people who were seeking the truth were somehow crazy, deranged, dangerous. And it just upsets me so much that now that term, quote unquote, truther that they created is now associated with flat earth, with crisis actors, and every other bull schniz conspiracy theory they can put out there to discredit people like yourself and myself when we talk about the reality of 9/11.
Yeah, I remember back in the day, people were, the truther thing came out, and they're like, "You're a dirty truther." I'm like, "It's better than being a liar." I don't know what the hell. How could they even conceive something like, "Oh, you believe in the truth, you're calling for truth"? That's a dirty, bad thing. That's literally how much manipulation and control they had of the narrative. But again, they want you to quote never forget. But they, of course, they want you to forget about all the other inconvenient details that shows you how the media, the government lied. They don't want to talk about, of course, World Trade Center 7. They don't want to talk about all the inconsistencies and also the aftermath. And the aftermath of 9/11 really is huge. We're talking about $1.5 trillion that has been spent on war since September 11th. $1.5 trillion. And what do we have in response from all of this? We have more radical Islamic terrorism. We have it on the rise. We have this war on terror that's creating more terrorism. And there's even new information coming to light just even a few days ago, as we're seeing a recent court document filed by the government that revealed that the special Russian counsel, Robert Mueller, previously worked to cover up the connection between a Florida Saudi family and, of course, the 9/11 terrorist attacks. And these recent court documents, of course, reveal more corruption by the FBI, more cover-ups that happened, and just outright lies connected to the man that is supposedly investigating Donald Trump on his Russian collusion right now. Which is absolutely insane. There's another article that, Jason, you sent me here by Newsweek that is titled "CIA and Saudi Arabia Conspired to Keep 9/11 Details Secret," new book says. And of course, one of the segments of these articles reads, "There remains a conspiracy of silence among high former U.S. and Saudi officials about the attacks. It's horrible. We still don't know what happened," said Ali Soufan, one of the lead FBI counterterrorism agents whom the CIA kept in the dark about the movements of future al-Qaeda hijackers. The article goes on from another whistleblower saying, "I am sad and depressed about it," said Mark Rusin, one of the two FBI agents assigned to the CIA's Osama bin Laden unit, who says agency managers mysteriously blocked them from informing their headquarters about future al-Qaeda plotters present in the United States in 2000 and again in the summer of 2001. It is patently evident the attacks did not need to happen, and there has been no justice. So again, large cover-up, even today coming out from internal U.S. government officials and documents showing there was a cover-up. They knew the attack was going to happen, and it happened. And it changed the course of human history and put us on this perpetual path of destruction of freedom and creation of more terrorism, especially in the Middle East. We have comments about this, Jason, and just the basic bare-bones facts of this, of how the intelligence agencies let these guys in there, gave them a clear pass.
Yeah. I mean, we can get into how they were taken in through a Saudi Arabian consulate that had the whistle blown on it in the late 90s prior to this, before the hijackers came in, as a CIA base where they were shipping in radical Islamists and jihadists to work with the Central Intelligence Agency and other intelligence agencies. Now, in this article, Luke, they clearly say not only did the attacks not need to happen, but the CIA lied about how many instances they came across these hijackers. It was supposed to be 1 or 2 and some mismanagement. In this, it's 50 to 60 times confirmed. And in this article, they talk about how they believe the CIA was actually trying to recruit some of the hijackers. Now, if we go back to my film, Fabled Enemies, from 2008, 10th anniversary.
Yeah, the hijackers were even connected to FBI informants and staying with FBI informants in Florida. Like there's so much collusion. Sorry, I cut you off, Jason.
No, you're right. I'm not sure if it was Florida where that happened. It very possibly could have been. But yes, Khalid al-Mihdhar stayed with and rented from an FBI informant, something they don't want to tell you. They don't want to tell you about how Robert Wright and other whistleblowers talked about how the money moved through Yasin Qadi. They knew how the money moved. They tried to get these people arrested. Nothing was done. Tom Fitton, who now heads up Judicial Watch, is in the film next to Larry Klayman, next to Robert Wright, talking about 9/11 truth. Where are you now, Tom? Where are you now? But I want to play this small clip. We'll see how the audio is. Who knows? Some of it's a little bit scratchy. But this is
turn on closed captions, Jason.
Ah, that's a good idea, my friend. I like that. Can I? Unfortunately, this video is not closed captioned because it was put up 10 years ago. But but I wish it was. This is Diane Albrighton calling the CIA. Let me repeat this for you, folks. The CIA on Walid al-Shehri, one of the hijackers prior to 9/11, and nothing was done. Does that not ring alarm bells, folks? Let's see if we can actually play it.
Went public and said,
here we go.
Bush knew of the impending attacks on America.
See,
he did not
man, this kills me. that
he
the
needed that
volume
war
on these are
terror.
so
He
terrible.
was quickly disciplined.
But here it is
Well,
right
maybe
here.
put your microphone near the computer.
Can't do that. I have it muted. That's why I have the headphones
But at
on.
least one woman we spoke with was not surprised
But
at all.
it's going right now, and
Diane Albrighton was
right behind me, if you can hear some of this, this is Diane Albrighton. This is her talking about Walid al-Shehri and calling the CIA. Now, if you have to call the CIA on your neighbor, and he ends up being a radical Islamist, guess what they do, Luke? They investigate it. They follow that person. They file a report. And this is far from the only report where, again, it's not that these intelligence agencies didn't communicate with one another. They absolutely did. But the bottom line is many of these guys trained at U.S. military bases. They had FBI connections. They had CIA connections. And even James Woods was on a plane the summer before 9/11 where he claimed that Muhammad Atta and 3 other hijackers that were not supposed to be connected to him were doing dry runs of hijackings, and that he, the stewardess, and the pilot all filed reports. They all filed reports to 9/11, yet nothing was done, mysteriously, Luke. And this incident was not discussed in that 9/11 commission report that everybody points to.
Yep, active cover-up, active criminal operations by our own intelligence agencies, which of course point the finger directly at them for the responsibility of this attack. But again, you talk about that, you're a crazy conspiracy theorist, even though we have the direct evidence, we have the whistleblowers, we have people coming forward, we have everything linked before them. We had everything, highlighted. But all these dumbtards are wanting to talk about space beams and holograms. And I'm like, what? And it was maddening. It was absolutely maddening right after 9/11 to have to deal with such indiscretion against knowledge and information and truth. Because if you really do care about what happened, you're going to look into it to try to prevent another one from happening. You're going to try to hold those people accountable. And the people in the government who failed us, who allowed these attacks to happen, who made them happen, they were promoted. They weren't fired for failing. NORAD failed. The agency that was supposed to protect our air agencies, very surprisingly, had all these military drills that sent off aircraft, military aircraft that were supposed to respond, that usually do respond in a very timely manner, for around 2 hours. Nothing from the best U.S. military air force that was ready to go and usually intercepts planes within just a few minutes. Again, the questions that people had, the evidence that we had was just insurmountable. You guys did a great job highlighting a lot of that information, covering it in Loose Change. I was mainly the guy organizing a lot of the efforts, and it's still crazy today. That. Yeah. I mean, we're here, and there's also Michael Springmeyer. You want to cover that, Jason?
Yeah, there's another person that I heavily featured in my film, Fabled Enemies, for the very fact that he was that person that worked at the Saudi Arabian consulate, blew the whistle, and he was forced to leave. And he talked about how he believed that these guys were shipped in through that consulate, where, again, they were working for intelligence agencies to work with their, what? Asset, Osama bin Laden. And, right now I think we're going to play some of the interview that you did with Springman. Again, guys, I apologize if the volume isn't totally up to snuff, but
Captions should work on this one, I think.
Yeah, but it's tough because, again, every time that I actually go into Skype with somebody, it lowers the volume of videos for some reason that I play, and usually I have to download them to get good ones. But here is Luke talking to Michael J. Springman, and this video is from 2015.
When I was there, it was about the middle of the recruiting process for the Mujahideen in Afghanistan. And people would come to me with no ties to either Saudi Arabia or to their own country. For example, there was a couple of Pakistani fellows who were going to a Commerce Department trade mission in the United States on auto parts. They couldn't name the trade show, and they couldn't name the city in which it was being held. The CIA case officer in the commercial section, Paul Arvitveit, TVEIT, who's now retired and living in Virginia, he immediately called me up and said, "We want visas for these guys."
Yeah, so people are saying the volume is very low here. Yeah. But continue on.
Yeah, so what you just heard him say is that one of these guys that was asking for a visa application was saying that he was going to the United States for a trade show. He couldn't name the show, he couldn't name the place, he couldn't name anything. So Springman doing his job was like, guess what? No visa for you. You're not going to the United States. You can't even tell me what you're doing. So he gets a phone call from the CIA consulate officer telling him to let this guy into the United States. What does that tell you? What does that tell you when the CIA is actively bringing these guys in? I mean, it screams ridiculous to think that somehow they fixed these problems after Springman left when, according to the official version, 17 of the 19 hijackers came through this Saudi consulate. It's nuts.
Yeah, again, you didn't need these conspiracy theories. You didn't need the absolute collusion. I know exactly what happened on 9/11. There was a lot of dumbtards who were pushing that kind of ideas out there. The evidence was there. The evidence was clear. There was active collusion. There was active intervention by the intelligence agencies to make this happen. It was documented. There was evidence. There was whistleblowers. There was people who saw it. There was people who, again, proved it. You didn't need to get into, I think this happened and then this happened, theoretically this is where it failed, and I think it failed on purpose with a disinformation campaign that correlated with mainstream media, and I believe government infiltration that made this the center focus point, where still, even today, some people be like, oh, you question 9/11, you're a crazy conspiracy theorist. No. And again, those people are again, very much more rare than they ever have been because of the work, the hard work that we have to do, and the persecution and all the slander that we have to go through, pushing the actual evidence, pushing the actual information. You see any of this information, screen capture it, share this video, share the articles, share it with your friends, family members to get this discourse to be what it really should be about, instead of the traps that they lay out for us and push us towards that destroy movements. This movement has been destroyed, and I believe it has been destroyed internally from either just crazy people and also infiltration from outside to push all these crazy theories and to discredit a lot of the legitimate people, a lot of the legitimate evidence that, of course, people didn't look at because they looked at the sensational stuff. And that's why I believe the movement failed. But continuing on with the same trend, even 17 years later on, not much has changed, Jason. If you look at what's happening right now, everything has pretty much come full circle. The United States pretty much set up the Mujahideen, Al-Qaeda, and the Bin Laden family with the Saudi Arabian contracts, with them fighting the Russians. 9/11 happened, obvious clear collusion between Al-Qaeda and U.S. intelligence agencies, and now today it is still happening. 17 years later, after 9/11, the United States military-industrial complex, the intelligence agencies, they are still today working with Al-Qaeda. This is why this is an important video. This is why we need to talk about this. This is why we can't repeat our history. This is why we need to understand it fully, because today, as we're talking, Donald Trump, Nikki Haley, the U.S. military wants to protect Idlib, a province in Syria that, of course, the Russians, Iranians, and Syrians want to attack, that has an estimated 10,000 linked Al-Qaeda fighters, with videos coming out of Idlib with them celebrating 9/11, saying that they were supposedly responsible for 9/11, with them claiming victory and war on the West. And this is what Donald Trump wants to protect now and risk a war with Russia against. And at the same time, the United States is officially allied with Al-Qaeda inside of Yemen. Al-Qaeda leadership, their money, their connections, what they're able to be able to accomplish is mainly because of U.S. American foreign policy. The AP investigation that came out just a few weeks ago showed that the U.S. is allied with Al-Qaeda in Yemen. They revealed how the American-backed U.S. Saudi Arabian coalition is forging deals with Al-Qaeda fighters because they are working on the same side against Houthi rebels that are mainly interlinked with Iran. Saudi Arabia is interlinked with the Wahhabist rebels, who, of course, are predominantly Al-Qaeda. And the U.S. coalition, the U.S. also has troops on the ground right now in Yemen, going after the Houthi rebels, fighting alongside Al-Qaeda. The Saudi Arabian coalition goes into Yemen, goes into a specific town. They say, okay, Al-Qaeda, we're going to pay you, leave this town. Al-Qaeda leaves this town, reorganizes, remobilizes, pushes their global efforts for global jihad. And Saudi Arabia and the United States claim, yes, we had victory here. We got rid of al-Qaeda from this town. Meanwhile, they were just relocated and money was given to them. Like, this is what's happening right now. Right now, as we're speaking, inside of Yemen. So, again, not much has changed. 10,000, an estimated 10,000 al-Qaeda-linked terrorists in Idlib right now. Donald Trump is willing to have a war with Iran, with Russia, with Syria, just to protect them. What does that tell you? And there's even an article by Alternet that just came out that says, here's why al-Qaeda may be stronger than ever 17 years after 9/11. Well, they're stronger than ever, and these radical Islamic terrorists exist because of the problem, reaction, solution, Hegelian dialectic that they're pushing on the American people. They need these boogeymen. They want these boogeymen. They want these terrorists who are going to Western countries and committing Western terrorist attacks, who are driving trucks into people, who are blowing themselves up. They need it and want it. The state operates with them cohesively, mainly because it justifies what they're trying to accomplish, and that is more power, more money, more control, more exaggerated foreign policy, military-industrial complex spending, because if it wasn't for them and the United States propping them up, we wouldn't have all the fake bullcrap that we have in our society shuffling away the majority of our money towards freaking fighting something that we're building up at the very same time. Do you guys see what's happening here? Do you guys understand what's happening here? This is more important than ever, and sadly, there's less independent media out there than there has been through any time that I have ever been in this business because of the squashing of this message. We are under attack. We're barely surviving financially, to be completely honest with you guys. We don't know how we're going to continue this operation, but that's a whole another story. Other operations have completely failed because of the censorship that is happening, because of the blacklisting of this information that we are providing you here today. And this is important information. If you care about this country, you care about your freedom, you care about the United States, this is an issue that needs to concern you and everyone else. I don't care if you're a Trump-tard, if you're a libtard. It doesn't matter what you are. What matters is what is right and what is wrong, what U.S. foreign policy has done after 9/11, what it is continuing to do. Now, it's only going to reverse us back and make us repeat history. And that is a costly endeavor that this country cannot handle. That's my take on it.
Well, you know what's crazy about this is if you were to talk to somebody, get in a time machine, and go all the way back to 2002 and say, hey, 15 years later, because about 15 years later is when we started seeing the headlines, it's going to be pretty open that we're working with al-Qaeda in other nations to take out other Muslim extremists. Because it was around 2010, 2011, 10 years after the attacks, the al-Qaeda boogeyman wasn't working anymore. And all of a sudden, the rise of ISIS happened. The rise of ISIS, and there was a new Islamic extremist movement, Luke, and this is what we had to be paying attention to. And now you can literally Google al-Qaeda Yemen, al-Qaeda Syria, and you will see they are allied with the United States. And to me, this really speaks to the fact that 9/11 is not a quote-unquote inside job, and that is why I made Fabled Enemies. I made Fabled Enemies to try to direct people away from all the physical anomalies on 9/11, which we obviously covered in length with Loose Change Final Cut, and we added a lot of other things, but the international intelligence operation that 9/11 was, the role of the U.S. government, the role of the war games that day, the role of Saudi Arabia to bring in the hijackers, the role of the Pakistani ISI to fund those hijackers covertly, the role of Israel to not only surveil the attacks, but also surveil the hijackers and use Amdocs and Comverse to literally spy on the majority of agencies in the United States. All of this stuff is covered in Fabled Enemies, and then the subsequent cover-up. The covering up of the FBI whistleblowers, Robert Wright and others. The covering up of the John O'Neill information, which has now been made into a Hulu miniseries starring Jeff Daniels. That's how far we've come, and people don't even realize how important that is. There is so much going on with 9/11 and so many things that we have to look at. Able Danger is another one where you have Anthony Schaefer, who's now a talking head on Fox News. You see him all the time, bringing down the U.S. government's lie that they didn't have Atta and all these other guys in their scopes well before 9/11. And we still have never gotten to the bottom of that. There's still so much out there that needs to be explored. And the fact that the 9/11 Commission was always set up to fail, it faced resistance throughout, and it was nothing more than a PR stunt instead of an actual investigation, Luke.
Yeah, well, people need to understand here, politicians and the government are not here to help you. They're not here to serve you. They're here to use you. Like we saw with Donald Trump. Let's be honest. Let's call a spade a spade. A lot of people are not going to like that I'm talking about this. But Donald Trump, when he was running to be president of the United States, clearly said, you will find out who really knocked down the World Trade Center. Quote, it wasn't the Iraqis, Trump said. You may find it's the Saudis. Donald Trump said this. Donald Trump raised questions about 9/11. But, and that's why we started with that video in the beginning of this broadcast. But again, as soon as he became president, not a mention of that. He talked about Saudi Arabia and all these other criminal things that they were interconnected with. And now he's holding a freaking lit up globe with the Saudi princes, giving them weapons deals, working with them in Yemen, working with them in Syria, helping the spread of radical Islamic terrorism, because Saudi Arabia finances a lot of the major Wahhabist mosques, churches, schools all across the Western world, and a lot of the terrorist attacks come from people who are influenced by this Wahhabist radical Islamic ideology that is pushed on and promoted with the help of the United States and, of course, Saudi Arabia and Israel as well, especially when it comes to what's happening right now in Syria, with them just backing the mainly Sunni-backed rebels against the Shia-backed rebels in Iran. And that's the next big conflict that they're going over. There's even another article here showing how Trump prioritized U.S.-Saudi Arabian ties over justice for 9/11 victims. And this is a very important story that I'm going to share in the comments section of this video, but just highlights with what even other former FBI agents are coming out and talking about how they're trying to get this information to Donald Trump. This one specific FBI agent, Kenneth Williams, who was behind the authored infamous July 2001 memo saying that, yeah, the United States could have prevented 9/11, but they haven't. And Donald Trump is openly just ignoring him. And modern day society today, because of the war on terror, because of the war in Afghanistan, we have a rise in the Taliban, we have a rise of Al-Qaeda, we have a rise of ISIS, we have a rise of Al-Nusra, and all these other radical Islamic terrorist groups that wouldn't exist and wouldn't be as prominent if it wasn't for the U.S. reaction after 9/11. And then one last thing, the most outrageous thing that I saw today, and I want to get your reaction to this as well, but this is from one of the lefty resistance members, libtard resistance movement that is just utterly insane.
Well, you know, it looks like we're just coming back on the live stream right now. For some reason it faded out, but we never lost the connection. Obviously, I didn't lose a connection to you. We apologize about that, folks. But Luke was basically talking about this ridiculous comic by a New York Times best-selling author where they're trying to take 9/11 imagery and representation and make it about Russia and the election somehow. Somehow, we're supposed to believe now, Luke, that Russia is as dangerous as terrorists ramming planes into buildings. I mean, it's so ludicrous. We've obviously covered the Russia hoax at length, but it shows you how convoluted the political conversation has become in this country, how divided, how dishonest, how disturbing, how disgusting it is. And quite frankly, I think that this is not only the work of an ignoramus who made it, but an even more ignorant person to what's really going on in the world to post it.
Yeah, this is the modern day propaganda. This is the modern day psychological warfare, misinformation, misdirection. No, let's not talk about the aggressive U.S. foreign policy that Donald Trump is committing that is actually helping the rise of radical Islamic terrorism. Let's not talk about that. Let's talk about Russia being attributed to attacking us That's so stupid. And it's mind-blowing to see the discourse being turned to this. Meanwhile, the actual issues that affect us and that has the majority of our taxes go to, that's not even important. So this is the propaganda that we're facing in today's day and age. It's multifaceted. It's idiotic. It's stupid just on its basis levels, and needs to be countered, and it needs to be countered with the truth of what's actually happening. So again, we do not repeat history. We're going to repeat history. We're doomed to repeat it. There's doomed to be more major terrorist attacks, mainly because there's a rise of radical Islamic terrorism, which is directly financed by your tax dollars, by your money that you give to the state. That's an issue that has been a predominantly priority for me after 9/11. It should be still a priority. Remember it. I want to thank everyone for sharing this video. I want to thank Kyle Anderton for the $5 super chat for saying thank you for your quality content. We do our best here. We're honest. We're trying to be as legitimate as we can. We started this broadcast over an hour ago, and we went into a lot of different issues. So if you found any of this useful, make sure to share it with your friends and family members. Jason, anything else you want to share and talk about on the 17th anniversary of 9/11?
Well, I just want to let people know that this issue is far from done in my eyes and in my mind, and people like myself are going to be battling this and fighting for the truth about this for as long as we live. And until we actually get the truth about 9/11 and make those responsible face trial, be prosecuted, we're never going to heal as a nation. Our entire foreign and domestic policy is based on the lie of 9/11, and it is time to take that lie down with the truth. It's very upsetting, and I just want to, give a heartfelt thank you to some of the members in the chat that I saw have the badge that are now subscribed to WeAreChange. It helps us out so much, guys. I can't even tell you how difficult things are getting with the fact that all of our videos now they haven't just demonetized them out of the gate, so as soon as we post them, we can just ask for a review. Now they wait for 100 views, and then after that 100 views, they demonetize them, making you sit at your computer an extra 5 or 10 minutes to bring this out. So they're pulling out all the tricks. We don't have a free internet. We don't really have free speech in this country. Anybody that speaks too loudly, you get shadow banned. Or, they make up lies about you, like Luke was talking about. They try to associate you with the worst of the worst or the craziest of the crazy. And I'm just here to tell everybody that people like me are not going away, and we will continue to fight for the truth about 9/11 by doing videos, by making documentaries, by talking to people within our community, and by continuing to demand the truth. Even if we have a president that made false promises, backed out of them, and made a $400 billion plus arms deal with Saudi Arabia, even though we have a president that has given Israel everything they want, carte blanche, even though we have a president that some people actually believe is wearing a Superman cape with a big Q on his chest that's going to save the world. None of that's happening. You can't expect anybody to save you but yourself, so you have to go out, you have to be the change that you want to see in the world, and you have to take action, Luke.
Very well said, Jason. People don't understand the amount of attacks and the different levels of attacks that we're facing for just even standing up for this message, just for even trying to do our diligence and do our work here, and to do it as honestly as we can with showing you the exact documents with the exact records. I want to thank you, Jason, for your long history of just amazing work, amazing documentaries. You've been a big pivotal fight in this. I'm definitely not giving up. I definitely don't want to see history repeated. And just understand, people, we're definitely under attack. Our numbers are getting dramatically reduced. The algorithms decide what people see and what they don't see, and they definitely do not want you to see this message for obvious reasons. They want to ridicule us, they want to attack us, they want us shunned away from the society, from the big national discourse, and the only way to prevent that is with you sharing this message and you being a part of this broadcast. So I thank you also to Jesse Schmidt. Really means a lot, and really means a lot having everyone here and being a part of this show, because if it wasn't for you guys, we wouldn't exist. And that's why I end every single broadcast by saying, I love you. Thank you again so much for watching. Stay tuned for a lot more.